Hello, friends. Today I am joined by Essie and Hsin-Fu Wu. As a homeschooling mom of two boys, Essie wanted her sons to know that they are part of a long heritage of Asian Americans contributing here in the US. But when she couldn't find materials to teach them that, Essie and her husband developed their own. They are passionate that all people are made in God's image, and that as Paul discusses in 1 Corinthians 12, diversity makes us stronger. Hsin-Fu was born in Taiwan to parents who were from China. He lived in Indonesia before immigrating to the US as a tween, and he served in the US military for 20 years before settling down in Tucson, Arizona. And I am delighted to get to chat with you both today. So here at the beginning, please tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, and how you got started homeschooling. And Essie, I'll let you start, and then your husband can join in with his side of the story.
Well, thanks, Amy, and thanks for having us. We're really excited to be here today. And I'm from Michigan, and I lived there till I was 12. And then I came to Phoenix and lived in Arizona, went to college here in Tucson at U of A. And then we settled here in Tucson when our kids were really small. And then we started homeschooling when our oldest was in second grade. And my husband was traveling a lot, and he wanted us to travel with him. But, they take attendance at school. So I was like, I don't know how that's going to work. But then his second grade class actually we loved the school, but the classroom just was not a great fit anyways. And so we decided to take him out and homeschool just while his dad was traveling, then we could travel with the dad. Providentially, it was fall of 2019. So then, the shutdown came, and it was really nice because we were already at home. And then my other one started kindergarten that next fall. And so I said, well, we're home, so let's just do home. So we've been homeschooling since then.
Oh, that's amazing. I love stories of kind of accidental homeschoolers, and then you're kind of like, man, I think I kind of like this. Let's keep going. Do you have anything to add?
Let's see. Well, if there's any interruptions, this is our dog Mando, who would like to say hi. And then the other part is I became a Christian when I was in college at the University of Kansas. And so my background, having grew up, born and raised in Taiwan, went to the public school system in Taiwan, and then coming to the United States, and then went to middle school and high school here in public school, and then going to the university here. It seems homeschooling was foreign to me until it, like what Essie said, almost is providential, but certainly by necessity. And I think with my business travels, and then also personal travels, if you would, it seemed like a great idea to have this educational opportunity as one of the intentions and the purpose for traveling and living. So that's why we've been doing it since fall of 2019.
And I like hearing too from both of you, it was part of something that was about your whole family. Like this was a lifestyle you wanted as a family. You wanted to be able to travel together, to not miss out on those experiences together. And so homeschooling provided a good fit and a good opportunity for that. But then I know as you began homeschooling, and it was, I assume, fitting in once shutdowns were over with travel plans and goals, you started thinking, wait, I can't find these resources for Asian American history. So how did you guys get started making the guides at Resilient Panda for Asian American history?
I'd always thought, when my kids were babies, I thought, oh, I've always been interested in history and heritage and genealogy. And I thought, oh, if I ever homeschool my kids, I'll homeschool them off their genealogy. Like, oh, this person, did whatever, this person fought in this war, or you can kind of connect to a lot of things. And it's kind of Charlotte Mason-esque, I think, because but we don't actually do that exactly. I tell lots of stories, but I think my kids would think that was kind of boring. But I've always wanted them to know their heritage. So when we moved to Southern Arizona, I didn't realize that there was so much Chinese American heritage in Southern Arizona and Japanese American heritage in Arizona until we started going to these little local history museums, because I love the ability to travel when you're homeschooling and go to this museum. And I was like, every museum has a little section about the Chinese. So I started learning more about that. And I remembered when my dad would go exploring in the mountains in northern Arizona, and he would find Chinese coins or Chinese pottery around in the mountains where there used to be mines. So I wanted my kids to know that there is a long Chinese heritage going back into the 1880s of Chinese Americans here in Tucson. And I was using Heritage Mom, Amber O'Neill Johnston's materials for Black American history as a supplement to the history curriculum we were already doing. And I emailed her and I said, I love what you have. Where could I get an Asian American version? And she said it doesn't exist. So I was like, oh, okay. And then I overheard somebody ask, it was another child, ask my older son, if the US ever went to war with China, Korea, or Japan, whose side would you be on? And I was surprised that someone asked, that was not a question I ever expected anybody to ever ask my son. His dad was in the military 20 years, the US military. So then I thought, I guess we need to keep telling the story of Japanese American incarceration during World War II, so that people know, none of those people were ever convicted of espionage or anything like that. On the contrary, they really served with distinction in the military. So that's when I was like, well, I'm going to do the research for my kids anyways. So I kind of used Amber's guides. She has these heritage packs. I used those as a guide and got started.
Yeah, Amber is great. She's been on the podcast twice before, and I love her resources and her books. So I'll put a link to those in the show notes as well. But I think that's so great that you're like, well, it doesn't exist. I guess we're going to make one, because it's so important for children to be connected to their own heritage and culture, of course, to know where they personally come from. Actually, one of my daughters, there's a painting in her grandparents' house of a great, I lose track of how many greats. It's a lot of greats grandmother as a little girl. And one of my daughter's history projects in high school was she created a recreation of that dress and sewed it. And it was a really neat thing that she learned a lot, and it felt connected to an ancestor. So there's that part that is valuable for your children to be connected to their heritage. But I also think it's really important, kind of like you were saying, you were using Amber's resources to learn more about Black American heritage and culture. It's really important, even for those of us who don't have Asian American heritage, to also learn more about this. For instance, the Japanese incarceration. So what would you guys say? Why would you encourage people maybe who are like, well, I mean, this is interesting, but we don't have any Asian American heritage, so why would I want to learn about this? What would you kind of say? What encouragement would you give to them?
Well, first of all, I think because it is American history, and it is another lens to look at American history through. I think sometimes if you approach a subject that you've heard multiple times before through a different lens, you'll learn more, or you'll just remember, because it's not the same old. It's very interesting. And I think part of the, like you said at the beginning, what makes us stronger is our diversity. Frederick Douglass had a speech in 1869 called the Composite Nation speech. And in that speech, he was actually arguing for Chinese American immigration, because the Chinese had come with the railroad, the gold rush and the railroad. And then people were starting to say, oh, actually, I don't think we should allow these Chinese to immigrate. And Frederick Douglass had this speech, the Composite Nation speech, where he said, actually, I think we should let the Chinese in, and the Japanese and everybody else. And he said, basically the secret sauce of America's greatness is her diversity. He said it allows us to innovate in really breathtaking ways because we get people who have different perspectives and different experiences. And, even just you see that in the Chinese that came over to work on the railroad, they had been working with dynamite for, generations. And so then when they needed to dynamite through the Sierra Nevadas, they had techniques and ways to handle that made the project go better. So I think that we want everyone to see that. And, like you mentioned, with the Japanese incarceration, we want to normalize Asian Americans in history, and that we want people to see that Asian Americans have been in this country for a very long time, all over this country, not just in California and Hawaii, but been here since the 1800s, even earlier. 1587 is the earliest Asian American on what is now the mainland U.S. That was Filipinos who came with some Spanish. So yeah, that's why we do think it is important. Just like, we teach our kids, Latin American history because we live in borderlands, but also Amber's Black American history materials.
Yeah.
Right,
Hsin-Fu,
just a
I'm
second.
interested to hear from you if there's something that's really surprised you as you have learned and taught Asian American history, to your children and helped develop this curriculum. Has there been anything that surprised you?
What I like about bringing up or presenting Asian American history is that it could be a way for Americans to see the commonalities between the different ethnicity and heritage, and to see how we were able to get along or not. But I think through the understanding or awareness, at the very least, of how each ethnic groups brought with them the strengths and the diversity, and also their cultural nuances, and of course the cuisines. That makes us Americans better understand our own country and our own heritage as a nation rather than as a particular subgroup. So that's how I would answer the question of why it would be good for everyone to know about Asian American history. And again, it's not just Asian American history, but Essie has mentioned the Black American history and experience as well. And then about the whites who came and others in their experiences. And I think one with respect to what I found surprising was the commonality of purpose. Why did people come to the United States, or why did the early settlers came? And for freedom, for religious freedom, for economic opportunities, and then the other surprising but taken for granted way was, well, the way they sought new opportunities and how they dealt with it here through hard work, and then trying to make where they're now, the place they're now, better than where it was before. And then also see the commonalities of well, it's actually kind of nice to have some nostalgia or some reminiscence of the place where they came from, so they brought their culture in. So I think learning these histories of the different subgroups and then considering it as a whole will help me better understand the whole of American experience, and then help me become a better citizen too. And so with regard to another discovery, if you would, is how specifically to the Chinese American history and experiences, how Chinese Americans have impacted civics in the United States. So, for example, I think I took our immigration process for granted, but that was because of is it
Wong Kim Ark.
Yeah, Wong Kim Ark, in his case, which determined birthright citizenship. So I thought, oh, okay, so my kids would not, well, I think more specifically my 13-year-old, who was born on a United States Army base in Seoul, South Korea, he wouldn't have become U.S. citizens had it not been the birthright citizenship law. And then also with regard to civics is and Essie and I just celebrated our anniversary last week, and then the 12th of June is actually Loving Day, and so we wouldn't have been married without that law has been passed. So there's a better awareness of how the histories of the minorities and the histories of our heritage affected how we live today. So those are the two surprises that I can think of.
I actually, of course, by the time this comes out, it will be months in the future, but it's funny that you bring that up because I actually just today picked up some library holds, including a picture book about the Loving family. And so if anyone is not familiar with that story, reach out to me. I'll give you the book titles. But yeah, I was talking to my kids recently about how this is not ancient history. Like both sets of grandparents are alive, like our kids and teens when this is going on. So this is not old news and still impacts us today for sure. Essie, how about you? Anything that has surprised you as you've kind of learned more and have begun to teach this topic?
I didn't realize that so many early, especially Korean, Japanese, and Chinese immigrants were Christians. And I remember I went to the Hawaii Plantation Village on Oahu, and they had these it was a real working plantation, and now you can tour it. And our tour guide had been a child on that plantation. She said her dad had used an abacus to keep the books, and I was like, wow. So they had these different cabins, and they'd be set up like, oh, this was like a Filipino cabin, and this was a Portuguese family cabin, and this was a Buddhist Japanese family cabin, and this was a Christian Japanese family cabin. And I thought, oh, wow, I didn't realize there were that many Japanese American Christians then. And then in learning the Korean American story, when we were in Korea, we went to Korea's Emigration Museum about the people who, left Korea to start the Korean diaspora. And the first main group that came to the United States were mostly Christians. And a lot of the early Korean Americans were Christians, and they were very active trying to support Korea, which was fighting for its independence at that time against Japan. And a lot of their motivation for that was their Christianity and how they set up their communities. And same with Chinese American history. There was a 1885 court case by Mamie Tape and her family, Chinese American family, who were Christians. And they wanted her to go to their local public school, but they weren't allowed to. And so they took them to court. And so I just didn't realize that there also is a Christian heritage in Asian American history.
Yeah, that is really fascinating. And I maybe your next project can be, writing some picture books, doing a little bit more digging into those stories, because that's fascinating. Well, both of you have already talked about many things I think that you wish people maybe knew more, or might be something that's unfamiliar to folks. But is there anything else that you haven't mentioned that you wish people knew and understood about Asian American history?
I think I would say just how long and wide and deep it is here in the United States. That actually Asian American history, not to mention, Pacific Islander in Hawaii, like Native Hawaiians, but Filipinos came in 1587. The first permanent settlement was 1763. So we, on our webpage, resilientpandahistory.com, there's a page that has Asian American history sites all around the country. I just thought I'd collect them and put them there so people could look and see, like, oh, I didn't know there was an Asian American historic site in North Carolina or in Minnesota or in Philadelphia. I've even been surprised how many there are, and just how many, important innovations or things happen because of Asian Americans. Like the first airplane to fly on the West Coast was a Chinese American, Feng Ru. And actually, Sun Yat-sen invited him to China. This is like 1910 or 1911. He said, look, come over here. He did. He's the father of Chinese aviation. And there is you can see a lot of cross Pacific pollination, basically. There was like a foreign exchange, or not a foreign exchange, but a foreign students program in New England in the 1800s, where young Chinese men came and lived with families in New England and studied. And a lot of them went back to China to be like the father of railroads in China or things like that. And then a lot of people who were really influential came here or studied here. Like I think the first leader of like Sun Yat-sen lived in Hawaii. He was educated here. Then he went back and became the first leader of China after they got rid of the emperor. Syngman Rhee, the first leader of South Korea, tell me if I'm getting some of this wrong, also was educated here. There's a lot of this back and forth. And you see a lot of creativity, in art and food and even like innovation and inventions. And I think that cross-pollination has been really helpful for everyone in ideas and techniques. And I think that makes us stronger.
Yeah. Hsin-Fu, would you add anything to that?
So one surprise was the story of Hsin, who supported a well-known businessman, I forgot his name right now, who was championing the establishment of national parks. And so Tai was the trail cook for this billionaire's entourage of editors and writers and other influential people who could support such a establishment of the national parks. So the group went on a 2-week journey through what is now Yosemite, I believe, if I recall correctly. And so as a trail cook, Hsin had to be responsible for planning and organizing and then making the meals. And he didn't just make simple camp food, but he had the spread of silverware, china, literally and figuratively, I suppose, and delicious, delicate pastries and other cuisines. And then I think, if I remember correctly, he will also make fortune cookies with little fortunes to help advertise and advocate for the establishment of national parks there. Now, what made the journey so unique to me is the challenges of a trail cook making such fine dining meals and having to consider the logistics of that and dealing with the harsh environment and terrain, and then dealing with accidents and having to to compensate for that, and how he still was able to deliver the fine dining experience on the trail. So I thought that was quite a surprise, and I wish that I could live through that and be part of that experience.
Yes, I would like to camp like that, please. That sounds
Yes,
great.
that's right. Yeah.
And we know all of this from a children's book, a picture book. There's
Okay,
a
because
picture
that
book.
was going to be my next question. I know that asking for favorite book recommendations is like the worst question because there's millions. But do you have like a few maybe to whet our appetite? And then, of course, I know you share more in your resources. But tell me this title and then maybe a few others for a variety of ages.
Mountain Chef is this one we were talking about because it's really fun. You know, you can't have everything about like, oh, there was exclusion and discrimination, blah, blah. It just needs to be like fun and creative and, you know, making fortune cookies from scratch while camping. And then his fortunes were in English and in Chinese. And they were things like, may you always remember the mountains or something like that. So that was cool. There's a newer book that we like called Mamie Takes a Stand, which actually was written by a Christian author. And she includes like some of her background, why she's doing it, because she also believes all people are made in the image of God. And it was the family from San Francisco in the 1880s who was advocating for equal access to education. Like for older kids, I had my Asian American history class that my son was in at our local co-op read a book, Step Up to the Plate, Maria Singh. And it's a chapter book, so like 8 to 12 years old. And it's a really fun book. You learn a lot about World War II home front in the United States. And the main character, her dad is a Sikh immigrant from India, and her mom is Mexican American. And so it has a lot of stuff like Rosie the Riveter and baseball and rationing and collecting scraps of metal and saving your bacon fat. But also it has, you know, that California's 1913 alien land law. Her parents couldn't own the land they were farming because it was illegal. And her mom lost her citizenship when she married her dad. It was illegal for her dad to become a U.S. citizen at the time. And then when her mom married him, she lost her status as a U.S. citizen. So things like that. So I like that book. And then older kids, there's a book called Weed Flower. It's a chapter book about Japanese American incarceration, like historical fiction. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those would be a few.
Those are some great ones. Do you have any titles to add?
I think for me, it would actually be a documentary called Far East, Deep South, where I guess this rapper from LA somehow had to find out that he has heritage from Mississippi. This Asian American, Chinese American rapper from LA found out that his heritage actually came from Mississippi. And so he went to figure out what that was, and then talking to both the Chinese Americans that are still there and the Black Americans that are still in there about that. So that was surprising for me, also in the sense that, well, I didn't know that, you know, there is a Chinese population in a history in Mississippi, and then also the interracial experiences.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
So
I don't think of Mississippi as a hotbed of Chinese American history, but now I'm realizing I need to go to your website and find places maybe on my, off of my radar that might be interesting and fascinating to learn more about. Wow. Well, along with reading wonderful books, a lot of my listeners really love to include beautiful memory work in our homeschool day, poetry, things like this that are related to what we're studying. So do you have a poem recommendation that might support our Asian American history studies?
I have two. Can I give two?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay, one, it's called My Church by Tokiko Inoue, and you can find it online for free. There's a link in our Japanese American history guide. It was written by a Japanese American high schooler who was in the Gila River incarceration camp south of Phoenix. They published a book of their poetry. And I was surprised again by how many of these poems mentioned God or prayer or faith or things like that. So he says, can I read it?
Oh, please do.
Okay. My Church by Tokiko Inoue. My church is not of marble with damask hangings rare. It has no rich warm carpet on which to kneel in prayer. Nor has it deep-toned organ, but it's God's house, he is there. Our windows are not spacious or made of gold-stained glass, but they keep out the noises and let the sunlight pass. And now each Sunday morning, when we seek God through our gloom, we see him much more closely in our church, a barrack room. And so I found that very interesting and like a way to connect with history, like a person who was living through it. The other thing is she's Chinese and Korean American named Janet Wong, and she's a poet. She has a book called A Suitcase of Seaweed and More, and it's all kinds of poems about all kinds of things. She has one called Quilt, and it's got her family, like her kids have Chinese, Korean, German, all kinds of heritage, but it applies to pretty much everyone's family in the United States. Quilt. Our family is a quilt of odd remnants patched together in a strange pattern, threads fraying, fabric wearing thin, but made to keep its warmth even in bitter cold. So I like those.
Those are really beautiful. I will definitely put those in the show notes for this episode too. Yeah. All right. Well, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you guys for taking the time to chat with me today. Here at the end, I want to ask you the questions that I ask all my guests. And so the first is just, what are you personally reading lately? And let's start with Hsin-Fu this time.
Well, one book that I'm reading now is called The Prophet and the Queen by Todd Newman. He is a friend and a former colleague. And he's writing about the prophet Jeremiah from a person perspective. And I like the book so far because it kind of helps me visualize the experience of the prophet Jeremiah. And I was really curious about how he would describe how Jeremiah was put in the cistern. And that his descriptions of that was really visceral, and I felt I felt the way he wrote about Jeremiah and Baruch, his servant, really innovative and really thought-provoking for me. So that's one book, and then another book that I am reading is called Navigating a Restless Sea by Peter Denning and Todd Lyons, who are faculty at the United States Naval Postgraduate School, and they wrote about, and the book is about innovation and how to think of innovation beyond just an idea. It is really about adoption of the idea. And so much of the innovation process is no longer about coming up with good ideas, but actually convincing the community of practice how to adopt it. So I found that really interesting and motivating.
That makes me think about homeschool planning because it's really easy to make a plan. It's really hard to actually get it done, right?
Yes. So I like it because of how it's generalizable and how some of the techniques about sensing and envisioning and then communicating is it goes beyond just the technical innovation process, but like you said, any type of effort that you need to get people on board.
Yeah. How about you, Essie? What are you reading these days?
I'm reading Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer, which is kind of about like habits of Christianity, contemplative habits. I'm also reading a book called Jingjiao, the earliest Christian church in China, which is about the Christian church in China in the 600s and 700s, which I didn't even know there was a Christian church in China back then.
Yeah, that is fascinating. That sounds like a really interesting title. All right, final question. Essie, what is your best tip for turning around a homeschool day that is going all wrong?
I just try to remember that tomorrow's another day, that this day is a drop in the bucket. And if I can find a way to delight in my kids, then that's a win. Because I feel like if my kids know what it's like to be delighted in, that's what they need.
Yeah.
So I try to focus on that.
I think working together at the end of the day on a meal. The kids like to cook, and so that seems to be helpful to kind of get everyone together to work on a meal, and then to be food critics and talk about how this meal tastes and what could make it better.
Yeah. And it's like what Essie was saying, right? It's the reorienting. It's the children know you delight in them, wanting to delight in one another as a family and reorienting towards each other. I think a lot of times in those tricky days that we all have as families, it can be easy to orient away from each other. But a lot of times the restoration and the joy comes when we dig back in with each other. So, well, where can people find you guys all around the internet?
We have a website, resilientpandahistory.com. We're on Facebook and also Instagram. Facebook is it's Resilient Panda History, Discovering Asian American History with Kids, and Instagram is Resilient Panda History. And we sell our guides. They're downloadable. We'll give you a discount code. There's Chinese American, Japanese American, and Korean American guides, and they all are made to work together or to be a supplement to any history curriculum that you're already doing. It's made to like it just tells you this time period, just add in this stuff. We also have a timeline. If people don't already have their own timeline or book of centuries where you can put stuff in, and then you can kind of see how the connections are happening. Like, in Chinese American history, they had the 1882 Exclusion Act. Okay, so now that's when the Japanese and the Korean really start coming in because they need labor. And so that you can see how things are playing off each other. Yeah, and if you live in Arizona, we have a free guide about Asian American history in Arizona. So.
Oh man, it's too bad I live so far away. You need to come and do one for the East Coast. I will have links to all of those things in the show notes for this episode over at humilityanddoxology.com. And I'll make sure to put the coupon code in the show notes as well. So check that out. If you are listening or watching, make sure you take a minute to share this episode with a friend you think would be interested in learning more about Asian American history. And until next time, happy homeschooling.